Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai. I'm the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. These studies are so important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to it. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela presents part 2 of a 3-part discussion on the theory of African internationalism, reading from Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, Chapter 9, starting on page 288. For the first hour, Chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we'll open it up for you, our live viewers, to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leadership of the African nation and the worldwide African Revolution, our Chairman, Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, Comrade Akile, I want to thank you for the introduction and really want to welcome all of you, party members, Uhuru, movement members, and just people in general to this study. This has been an ongoing study for a few weeks now, dealing with fundamentally with theoretical and ideological questions. And it's an extraordinarily important time to be doing this, to be providing leadership for this incredible moment in the history of the United States and of just ongoing relentless protests, demonstrations, rebellions, fantastic period. And I know many of you from the party and the Uhuru movement either in the mix of those that are unfolding or planning those or organizing those. And we have a tremendous responsibility to take into the spontaneous struggles, some clarity, some science, because the people need the revolution, the people need the advanced detachment, the people need the Revolutionary Party of the African working class, not necessarily to teach them how to organize a demonstration or something to that effect, but to intervene in these incredible mass struggles. In some places, struggles have been going on, protests have been going on for more than 100 days consistently. And what we have a responsibility to do is to infuse some science into that, to take a to what end into the spontaneous struggles of the people. So I really want to express appreciation to all of you, and I want us to go ahead and continue looking at the some things in terms of theory that will help to tether the actions that we're involved in to long-term goals, to our objective of actually being a self-governing people, to take power over our own lives. Because if we're not talking about power, I don't care how militant an uprising or how militant a protest may be, the objective has to be the capture of political power over our lives. That's not the same even as taking a police station that we might hold temporarily, or setting up a police-free zone in a couple of blocks in a particular city. Even though I think these are really important events that are happening, because it contributes to fracturing the solidarity of the capitalist, the colonial capitalist state apparatus itself. And I think it also helps to undermine this whole omnipotence, this sense of omnipotence that is given to people about the strength and power of the colonial capitalist state. And of course, the police is an instrument of that state power that we are talking about. So this is important, but we're preparing to govern. Our discussion so much revolves around raising the political and ideological level of the African working class itself. That's who we're speaking to. And when we talk about working class, we're talking about whether you got a job or not. If you don't have a job, if you had one, more than likely you'd end up having to sell the value of your labor power in order to exist, in order to feed, clothe, and house yourselves and your families. So, and if you are not someone who has to sell your labor to survive, or the value of your labor. If you're an African, you're only a doorstep away from that. And the social relations that we exist in occur within the colonial reality, and which means that even often what appears to be this class distinction within the African population, and it does exist, but often it is only, it is limited, it is tenuous, it is ephemeral, often, because the fundamental contradiction where the class issue is concentrated is the colonial contradiction. That is the contradiction between the colonized African population at large and the colonizer North American or European white colonial state and population. So there is a class, the class contradiction does exist within the African nation, the African population, but the fundamental class question, again, is concentrated within the colonial question. So I want to look, we're supposed to be starting here on 288, and I want to go back a couple of pages and start on page 286, and on the second to the last paragraph on page 286. I want us to try to maintain some sense of continuity in the discussion. So I want to start there as opposed to exactly where I left off. And starting there, we say that and we're reading from Vanguard, which is the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And this piece that we're reading now is something that was taken actually from the 5th Congress, 6th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And this Congress, the 6th Congress, occurred in 2013. So we're talking about a 7-year-old political report that we're reading from. And I'm just saying that because there may be some reference here that speaks to, that is time related. And we decided to put this chapter along with the chapter on the question of the nation, both of which were part of the political report to the 6th Congress that was titled Uneasy Equilibrium. We decided to reproduce it here because we felt this discussion on African internationalism is so fundamental that we need to reinforce it going into the 7th Congress that we just had, and it's something that all of us need to grasp. And I'm hoping that you will read this, and we have it here in Vanguard. I'm calling on you to get this book if possible. And it's something, the book is something that should be studied, but this particular study on theory on African internationalism is something that I implore you to look at. And there'll be times, because we are an organization of the African working class, and not just in theory, but in fact, you will see like much of the membership and leadership of our party comes from the African working class. And the African working class has been so beaten up and so oppressed, and in many instances convinced that we're not capable of running our own lives, our communities and governments and things like that. And we've been convinced that due to a lack of education that's been denied us, and in many instances, I have to say, I have to be thankful for that, in the sense that because education under colonialism is more like training than it is anything else. It just trains us to be good servants of imperialist white power. And sometimes we spend more time unlearning what we were taught in these academies of the colonial ruling class. But we've been convinced in many instances that we can't learn it. And sometimes the institutions we've gone to that were supposed to be teaching us, rudimentary things like reading and writing and arithmetic or mathematics, etc. They've been deplorable, and they haven't really facilitated our ability to even learn some basic rudimentary things that would help us to navigate some of the ideas that we can find in books and things like that. So it may be that there are terms and words that you will find in this discussion that you're not familiar with. There's a great likelihood that there'll be words and terms you're not familiar with, but don't let them frighten you or intimidate you, because you can understand them. Despite what our oppressors say, and despite what you may have been convinced, you can understand them. And you should read them over and over again. If you seem to not have a good understanding, read it again and read it again. And what you will find is that the more you do this, the more you are able to understand if it's at all complicated for you from the beginning. And sometimes you want to, even when you're alone, read it aloud so that you can hear and become familiar with the words. And I think that sometimes that even helps us to grasp it. And if you can even have comrades and relatives, who can read with you, this will be helpful. I'm saying this because in addition to the actions that we're involved in, and practice is primary, that we have to engage and struggle. But the thing is that to know what it is we're struggling for, to be able to participate in the best possible way in solving the problems of our people, our community, it would be helpful if you could grapple with some of these ideas as they are put forth in books and things like that. So look at this, read it, and don't be afraid of it. Don't be intimidated, because you can understand it. And if I can understand it, damn it, you can understand it. I mean, I'm just like you. And we just have to be able to do that and have the courage to take it on. So I want to go ahead now. And I'm going again to the second full paragraph from the bottom of page 286. The material and human resources of Africa have gone to satisfy the requirements of life for Europeans at the expense of Africa and Africans. And part of the human resources is Africans ourselves. And that's in the United States, and that's on the continent of Africa, and that's in Europe and throughout the so-called Americas. The process of Africans producing and reproducing life has not been primarily for Africa and Africans. It has been primarily for Europe and the white world at our expense. This progenitor of world capitalism, the attack on Africa and Africans, along with the European assault on Asia and the Americas, rescued Europe and Europeans from an oppressive 1,000-year-long, disease-ridden, impoverished existence known as feudalism. This was the genesis of the capitalist system as a world economy, created on a base of the enslavement of Africans and others. A scientific analysis of human society requires that we take a dialectical approach. We cannot see the world as static and ready-made. Society has to be analyzed as a process that is in a constant state of motion, change, and development. There's always something new arising to replace the old, and all social motion occurs in relationship to this process of coming into existence and dying away. Europe's attack on Africa was effectively an assault on Africa's ability to produce life for itself. You look at the starvation, poverty, disease, violence, ignorance that's in Africa, it's imposed from the outside. You know that's true if you know, in fact, that human life and civilization had their origin in Africa. It's not like somebody came and planted life and put life there. It meant that Africa was extraordinarily conducive. The most conducive place in the world for life is Africa. This is where it all began. And human civilization itself developed first in Africa. So we say Europe's attack on Africa was effectively an assault on Africa's ability to produce life for itself. This assault has had the effect of pushing Africa and Africans out of history, history being the summation of the ongoing struggle to produce and reproduce life. Slavery, genocide, and colonialism are the stuff of which capitalism was born. I mention this because you hear all of these forces singing the praises of capitalism, the most productive system humanity has ever known. That's what we are told. In fact, I was in a meeting on yesterday, and it was really interesting, a party meeting, and a comrade from Sierra Leone wanted to address this whole statement that they hear about socialism, and as an opponent of capitalism, and how is it true that under socialism, the government owns everything. The government controls the water. The government controls the electricity. The government controls the transportation system. And obviously, this is a line that's put out by the African petty bourgeoisie in Sierra Leone and other places. And so the question had to be thrown back. In Sierra Leone, there is no water for the government to control. There is no electrical grid for the government to control. There is no power there for them to control. The thing is that the neo-colonial forces are giving everything to white power, and the workers have to take power, and we cannot be frightened by this notion that somehow workers come into power will make the water, the electricity, the housing, and everything, the infrastructure, the custody of the government in a time where there is no infrastructure, there is no clean water, there is no national electrical grid like in Sierra Leone right now. So this is anti-communist kind of statement, and that responds to the fact that slavery, genocide, and colonialism are the stuff of which capitalism was born. African enslavement was the first capital in the development of capitalism. The prevailing legal system, culture, religion, and general philosophical outlook or worldview constitute the superstructure of capitalism thus conceived. This superstructure is a natural product and reflection of this economic base of colonial society. I just want to repeat that this was something that was done 7 years ago, this political report. I mean, this has been our opinion forever. We've spoken of this for a long time. This is what an African internationalist assessment, the conclusion has brought us to. And I mentioned that because we say that, again, first of all, African enslavement was first capital in the development of capitalism. The prevailing legal system, culture, religion, and general philosophical outlook or worldview constitute the superstructure of capitalism thus conceived, and that this superstructure is a natural product and reflection of this economic base of colonial slavery. So it wasn't invented by Trump. I mean, you talk about Trump this and Trump that, and every time we find new political forces thrust into political motion by the crisis of the moment, you find forces who are discovering exploitation, discovering oppression, and trying to understand it for the first time. And what we're saying is that what we see happening to African people, the philosophical outlook in this country or in the world, even the religion and cultural reflections of culture expressions are reflection of a social system that was born from, has its genesis in slavery and genocide. This is a natural outcome, outgrowth, product of and supporter of such a social system. Slavery and colonialism gave rise not only to capitalism, but also to the capitalist and working classes alike of Europe and North America. The workers and the bourgeoisie, the two primary capitalist defining classes, have occasionally fought great battles with each other since their inception as contending social forces. Nevertheless, both were born and developed on a platform of slavery and colonialism. That is, the workers and the capitalists. Consequently, what is often called class struggle inside the US and Europe is actually contention among the workers and ruling class for control of the parasitic capitalist pedestal and its stolen resources. The parasitic foundation of world capitalism continues to exist up to now as the true economic base upon which the entire superstructure of the capitalist-defined, capitalist-dominated world rests. The total existence of white people and their ability to produce and reproduce life, is dependent on this parasitic relationship that came into being with the attack by feudal Europe on Africa and the world. Instead of separate, more or less self-contained worlds existing in casual relationship to each other, there's the capitalist world system, united by a parasitic economic relationship imposed by Europe upon the rest of us. There is therefore no European reality separate from that of Africa and the rest of the world. The entire world is now locked into a single dialectical process, a unity of opposites whereupon the gruesome extraction of life and resources from Africa and the rest of the world is a condition for the life and development of what we now know as Europe, white people, and the capitalist system to which we have been forcibly affixed. The legal system, culture, white sense of sameness, and political institutions are reflections of this parasitic economic base. Every white aspiration and dream, from expectations for happiness and a good life, from a successful marriage to a secure future for their children, requires drone strikes in Pakistan, police murders, and mass imprisonment in the African colonies and barrios of the US, and starvation and forced displacement of the oppressed throughout the world. Every expectation, every white aspiration and dream, every expectation for happiness and a good life, from a successful marriage to a secure future for their children, requires drone strikes in Pakistan, police murders, and mass imprisonment in the African colonies and the barrios of the US, and starvation and forced displacement of the oppressed throughout the world. That is an absolute truth. Whether the colonizer or the white person understands it or not, what they have, all the value that they have acquired rests upon a foundation of theft and expropriation, forced expropriation of value at gunpoint, in many instances of oppressed peoples around the world and inside the United States as well. When this is why you can get almost a knee-jerk response from white people to resistance, usually, typically, ordinarily, to resistance as it develops any place in the world. Rally around the flag, uniting with their own ruling class in many instances. And today, what we're seeing right now at this very moment is a trying time for the entire social system, while you have the Trump and his administration and the bourgeoisie associated with Trump doing everything they can to deeply unite the colonizer nation in opposition to the aspirations of the colonized, and trying to make sure that they do not lose what sector of the colonizer population that is sympathetic to the aspiration of the oppressed people, who hate to see the kind of thing happen with the police in public view, seen by millions of people around the world, with a knee in the neck of a prone, helpless, colonized subject. The bourgeoisie right now is split, and there's a sector that says do everything, rally around the flag, rally the white nation, rally white people to maintain their colonial status, helping them to understand. And this is what is a part of every message that you hear coming from the current administration. It is not a Trump response. It is a response of desperation from a social system and its spokesperson. And this is one version of the stance of the ruling class that is split. And this ruling class is split now because of the crisis that peoples around the world are causing with our struggles everywhere, and the differences of opinion about how to protect their own individual and diverse assets and asses has split them. So there's a difference of opinions on that. And there's a sector of the bourgeoisie that's organized around the administration of Donald Trump that says that would argue that our success depends on our ability to keep the Mexicans and the niggers and everything out of the country, and those that are there to oppress them, to make sure that that they cannot rise up, to make sure that they cannot challenge the status quo. And it tries to rally all as many as possible of the colonizer nation in solidarity with that. On the other hand, there are sectors of the bourgeoisie who can find represented in the political arena as well. And I say political in this instance, I'm talking about the electoral political arena, which is a bourgeois arena, whether it's the Republicans or the Democratic Party in the United States or the various other expressions of the bourgeoisie that you can find throughout the world. We're talking about a contest that's happening between sectors of the bourgeoisie. And the African people and the Mexican people and the indigenous people and the oppressed peoples who are trying to live are most often viewed as pawns that the bourgeoisie can use to have its way, the contending forces. So you have on the one hand, the forces who would unite around the Trump kind of expression. That's the bourgeoisie. It's not just Trump. Please don't misunderstand that. And then you have forces who would unite around what is currently Biden, but it could have been anybody. It was Obama. It could have been Bernie Sanders. The fact is that they have concluded that in order to be victorious, Bernie Sanders less than the other so-called white left politicians, Democratic capitalist politicians, they have concluded that in order to have their way, they unite these forces who are most likely to be victimized, bring them into the House, unite them around broad so-called democratic concepts that will not undermine the whole capitalist system that requires forced extraction of values, taking resources away from Africans and the oppressed peoples around the world. And that's the kind of politic that we've seen happen a long time ago, but it has a material basis. So we say that our theory, practical struggle, prepared the party to lead. While not fully appreciative of the parasitic foundation of the entire capitalist system resting on the brutal oppression of Africans and others, Karl Marx nevertheless recognized the relationship between the economic foundation of society and the resultant institutions and ideas. In his preface to a contribution to the Critique of Political Economy, published in 1859, Marx expounds on this relationship between the economic base and the superstructure that defines society. I really hope that you will look at this and take time to read it, because it's written in the way certain intellectuals, the bourgeois intellectuals, in fact, of that period wrote and sometimes still write. But here's what Marx had to say. In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations, which are independent of their will. Namely, the relations of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitute the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of consciousness. The mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. Say it again. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. And the economic foundation of this country and much of the world is colonialism. It's the colonial extraction of fierce, violent extraction of value, of resources, of human beings, of labor from colonized people by Europe and the white world. So we say that the changes in the economic foundation the changes in that, the changes in this colonial foundation, the changes here lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. That is the ideas, that is the culture, even religious expressions and what have you. In studying such transformation, it is always necessary to distinguish between the material transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural science, and the legal, political, religious, artistic, or philosophical, in short, ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. Just as one does not judge an individual by what he thinks about himself, so one cannot judge such a period of transformation by its consciousness. But on the contrary, the consciousness must be explained from the conditions of material life, from the conflict existing between the social forces of production and the relations of production, unquote. The era of struggle and resistance within which our party was born was an era of ebb and flow in the challenge to this parasitic relationship. The survival and longevity of the African People's Socialist Party, our persistent involvement in and learning from the practical struggles of the African working class and the fighting and oppressed peoples of the world are among the things that prepared us more than any other political formation for the tasks that confront Africa, Africans, and the world today. The birth of capitalism did not simply involve the replacement of the old feudal economic system in Europe with a new system. The death of European feudalism drew through the entire European world into turmoil. All the institutions and ideas that held feudal society together were challenged and sometimes cast aside, leaving Europeans with a frightening experience of ideological drift, foundering without a stable belief system, uncertain, totally uncertain. The whole European society adrift, afraid in many ways, just a sense of insecurity. This is because capitalism required a different set of values and belief than feudal society. In feudal society, the church had been a powerful presence in the life of Europeans for 1,000 years. The divine right of kings functioned as a key belief of feudal society that tied the peasant serfs to the land in service of the lords and nobility, fettering every aspect of their lives. In addition to the social chaos that befell Europe with the arrival of capitalism, the existing philosophical coherence was also a casualty. It was the end of one world, and with it, the end of the effectiveness of a worldview. That's why you hear sometimes today during this crisis, you will hear and read from these astute, sometimes persons who speak for large sectors of the white world, white population, talking about the end of times. It infiltrates even into the churches and things like this. This is the end of time. Because what is happening is that there are adrift ideologically and politically because of the change that's happening in the economic foundation of the entire world. And that change is the people fighting for freedom and fighting for take back their resources in Venezuela, all over Africa, all over Asia, and even in the African colonies and that they call ghettos and the barrios inside the United States. People are taken back, and this is shaking up the economic foundation. The economic foundation of the entire capitalist system is under assault, and therefore the ideas that hold it together, that gives it coherence, are themselves under assault. If you want to know why there seems to be such ideological confusion that's happening, if you want to know why there seems to be such consternation and such unease within the whole white world, then look not for their explanations, their self-defined explanations. Don't try to understand it by their own consciousness. Understand it because of what's happening in the world. Measure what's happening in the world that would make them have to come to certain kinds of conclusions or give them a certain unease about their understanding of the world. I mean, think about a world in which Africans have been defined as animals and bestial and not capable of speaking and thinking for ourselves, and as servile people who gladly and happily enjoy being enslaved and oppressed and just bringing mint juleps to the master on the plantation. And suddenly this African, who they have defined as so passive and so wanting to be white, now is standing up and now has a gun in his hand, or a Molotov cocktail, or a good idea in his or her head, that's struggling against this. This challenges everything that the white world thinks about itself, has thought about itself, and it is part of challenging the actual superstructure of a social system born of colonialism and slavery. In addition to the social chaos that befell Europe with the arrival of capitalism, the existing philosophical coherence was also a casualty. It was the end of one world, and with it, the end of the effectiveness of a worldview. The effectiveness of the worldview that has sprung from the arrival of colonial capitalism in the world is certainly something that's being seriously challenged. Karl Marx was one of the many, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure that I'm okay on the time. Karl Marx was one of the many who vigorously sought to explain the world and Europe's destiny in that world. Although generally the Europeans saw the destiny of Europe and the world as being the same thing, and still do. Marx's Capital and other works were products of this effort to explain the world and Europe's destiny. See, it's really important to say this, because people who have been influenced, and I've been influenced by Marx and his works, but people who call themselves Marxists, most instances treat it almost like biblical, like something that was brought down from the mountain by Moses, and these are the laws, and this is how you understand the world, without having a single idea of what it was that made it necessary for Marx to write this, for Marx to begin explaining this, for the tremendous amount of work that Marx did. And of course, Marx lived in society, as all human beings do, live in society. And all human beings experiences the struggles, the contradictions and complications of society at a given moment in history, and especially when there's great turmoil that's happening in that society that undermines the status quo. And the status quo, of course, rests upon a base, an economic base, where human beings engage with each other, this relationship that we have with each other that's often invisible and disguised to us, but we have to enter these relationships in order to produce what we need to survive. And so it's upon this pedestal, this relationship, rather, that the ideas stem, and the ideas come from this relationship, explains this relationship, and then affects how this relationship functions in material world. So Karl Marx's Capital and other works were products of this effort to explain the world and Europe's destiny. Moreover, Marx sought to distinguish himself in his works not simply as attempts to explain the world, but as agents for changing the world. Today, the people of the world find themselves very much in the same situation as the Europeans of dying feudal society. We are watching and experiencing the world changing beneath our very feet. The old world is gone. The white ruling class is busily, frantically attempting to explain the world and humanity's destiny in it, while refusing to recognize that the social system is irreversibly broken. It cannot be fixed. No explanation based on an assumption of the continued domination of white power, whether by socialist workers or the capitalist bourgeoisie, will suffice. This is the significance of African internationalism at this historical moment. African internationalists understand that what is required is the ideological leadership to show the way forward. Only we are able to explain the crisis of the old dying capitalist system. Only we can predict the unfolding future shaped by the oppressed masses of the people, whose resistance deprives the capitalist parasite of access to the resources, life, and blood of the colonized, subject, and dominated peoples whose conditions of existence represent the foundation of capitalist white power and imperialism as we know it today. Unlike Marxism and the bourgeois philosophers that have been blinded by their relationship with the world, African internationalism gives Africans and oppressed our own voices and our own brains capable of investigating the world from our reality and making an analysis stemming from that investigation. Africans are primitive accumulation. We recognize that capitalism has always rested and depended on a parasitic foundation. As a part of the primitive accumulation that Marx spoke of as a function of capitalist development, we are key to capitalist destruction. Indeed, the historical basis for the advent of socialism lies in the struggles of the colonized and dominated oppressed of the world coming to power under the revolutionary leadership of our own workers and laboring masses in all countries. Let's say it again. Indeed, the historical basis for the advent of socialism lies in the struggle of the colonized and dominated oppressed of the world coming to power under the revolutionary leadership of our own workers and laboring masses in all countries. Marx was unable to fully understand the importance of this question. Marx was able to declare that this so-called primitive accumulation is the historic equivalent of original sin in theology. He was able to characterize the earth-shaking events that resulted in the theft, sale, forced labor, and enslavement of hundreds of millions of African human beings. Nevertheless, Marx's position on the pedestal of our oppression prevented him from seeing the centrality of African and oppressed peoples in the struggle to overturn capitalism. What Marx termed primitive accumulation was in fact the deadly European assault on Africa, North and South America and Australia, and the extinction and the near decimation of whole peoples. It was the brutal rape of much of Asia and the Middle East, and the numerous internecine wars between European states battling for control of the slave trade and the colonies. It was the resultant growth in wealth that overturned European feudalism and ushered forth capitalism and the European nation. A real understanding of primitive accumulation would have required Marx to center most of his work on an examination stemming from this reality and to look to Africa, Asia, and the Americas for the leading forces against capitalism. But objectively, Marx himself was a beneficiary of primitive accumulation. Like others, his consciousness was shaped by this material relationship to imperialism during his lifetime. The libraries and universities he used for his research were filled with books and philosophy that were informed by this parasitic relationship. Historical necessity did not require Marx to understand and center his work on this reality. However, the African working class is required by history to understand this parasitic historical process that has from the beginning linked Europe, capitalism, and the rest of us in the embrace of death from which we are now disengaging. This is why Buchanan and Brzezinski are crying copious intellectual tears. We spoke of them early on. Understanding the reality of parasitic capitalism and drawing the correct conclusions from this understanding is the task that our party willingly undertook. To the dismay of the Buchanans, the Brzezinskis, and all the defenders of the imperialist status quo, our success in this area constitutes a fundamental component of the existential crisis of imperialism. For centuries, the advent of colonialist capitalism has been shrouded in mystery and superstition. Every explanation, whether by capitalists or anti-capitalists, has overlooked the source of capitalism emergence as the dominant world economy and its implication for the present. This has happened despite the fact that the truth has been hidden in plain sight. The problem is that the arrival of capitalism marks the emergence of Europe and white people as the driving economic and political force in the world. It marks a signal moment, a turning point in the fortunes of white people and the world. It is the beginning of an era from which the progressive material development of the white world would henceforth be measured. This is the issue that is increasingly being forced into the public domain. In 2012, the New York Times carried an article by Harvard professor Walter Johnson titled "King Cotton's Long Shadow." The premise of the article, excerpted here, is that African enslavement was crucial to the development of global capitalism. Johnson wrote, quote, "It is not simply that the labor of enslaved people underwrote 19th century capitalism. Enslaved people were the capital. 4 million people worth at least $3 billion in 1860, which was more than all the capital invested in railroads and factories in the United States combined. Seen in this light, the conventional distinction between slavery and capitalism fades into meaninglessness. Capitalism born of imperialism and not the other way around. Certainly, slavery was the main contributor to the emergence of capitalism, not only in the US, but in the world. However, while slavery was the main contributor to capitalism, it was not the only contributing factor. In the early 20th century, Vladimir Lenin, a Russian revolutionary of profound significance, struggled with other socialists in the era to come up with a definition of imperialism at a critical time in the anti-capitalist struggle in Europe. Lenin defined imperialism as capitalism developed to its highest stage. Imperialism, Lenin liked to say, is capitalism that has become rotten ripe. The term imperialism comes from the word empire, which can be defined as the complete domination of territories and peoples by foreign state power. During the era of the First Imperialist World War, that was fought to divide the world among several European bandits, the term imperialism was used to define political and economic features of capitalist-dominated European and social behavior and reality. Lenin's definition of imperialism was one of the several at the time, but it has come to dominate the understanding of politically active European and other anti-imperialists to this day. According to Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, that's the name of the pamphlet, quote, or the book, imperialism is capitalism at that stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trusts has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed, unquote. In Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, another Lenin work, he says, we have to begin with as precise and full a definition of imperialism as possible. Imperialism is a specific historical stage of capitalism. Its specific character is threefold. Imperialism is 1, monopoly capitalism, 2, parasitic or decaying capitalism, 3, moribund capitalism, unquote. Indeed, it is certainly true that Lenin has described certain features of capitalism. However, Lenin is wrong about imperialism being the highest stage of capitalism. The discussion of imperialism in Europe was a response to contradictions being experienced primarily by Europeans in Europe itself. The foray into an inclusion of the partitioning of the world and the intensification of colonization was to contribute to the definition of European reality. It was not a discussion of the reality of Africans and the colonized. Lenin characterized himself as a Marxist, a revolutionary whose worldview was fashioned by his acceptance of revolutionary theory and conclusions advanced by Karl Marx. We African internationalists have found particular interest in a critical insight of Marx that was clearly not understood as such by Marx's followers or by Marx himself. Again, we turn to the brilliant insight of this quote that we often cite from Capital, the quote that Marx himself did not recognize the significance of. Here we quote, "The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signalized the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief mementa of primitive accumulation," unquote. In the same work, Marx also explains, though not intentionally, the obvious contradiction impacting the relationship between white people, including workers and Africans and other oppressed peoples. This is the contradiction that is responsible for a commonality of cross-class or national interests within European society, and one of Marx's most important statements, quote, "Whilst the cotton industry introduced child slavery in England, it gave in the United States a stimulus to transformation of the earlier, more or less patriarchal slavery into a system of commercial exploitation. In fact, the veiled slavery of the wage worker in Europe needed for its pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World," unquote. There is no little irony attached to the fact that Karl Marx wrote much of Capital while being supported financially by his friend and collaborator, Friedrich Engels. Engels received his income from his father, a bourgeois factory owner whose wealth was derived from cotton and textile mills supplied by plantations, that's the Africans in the Caribbean. Stated simply, Marx's work on the plight of the working class that promised the future of the white workers of the world, let's see this again. Stated simply, Marx work on the plight of the working class that promised the future to the white workers of the world was financed by the labor of enslaved Africans who constituted what Marx would refer to as the primitive accumulation of capital, the beginning of the process, the equivalent in political economy to quote unquote original sin in theology. African internationalists are historical materialists whose investigation and analysis of the world has a starting point in an examination of the capitalist-dominated world from the objective reality and experience of Africans and the vast majority of the peoples on the planet, including white or European people. It is clear to us that imperialism is not a product of capitalism. It is not capitalism developed to its highest stage. Instead, capitalism is a product of imperialism. Let's say the whole thing gets its start. The wealth, the resources of Europe, of white people in general, that has been characterized by Marxists as being progressive in the development of human society. All of this has come as a consequence of colonialism and slavery. The colonization of Africa, the enslavement of vast majorities of the peoples of the world, and the current economic configuration that is being tested in a very serious way by oppressed peoples around the world. If anything, capitalism is imperialism developed to its highest stage, not the other way around. The imperialism defined by Lenin has its foundation, the imperialism defined by Lenin has as its foundation the so-called primitive accumulation spoken of by Marx. Finance, capital, the export of capital, monopoly, etc., are all articulations of a political economy rooted in parasitism and based on the historically savage subjugation of most of humanity. Road to socialism is painted black. Unlike Marx and Lenin, we African internationalists deny that there has ever been anything progressive about capitalism. Capitalism was born in disrepute of the rapes, massacres, occupations, genocides, colonialism, and every despicable act humans are capable of inflicting. Capitalism was not responsible for some great, otherwise unimaginable leap in production, which, quote unquote, despite its contradictions, resulted in human progress and enlightenment. What capitalism did was to rip the vast majority of humanity out of the productive process in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Australia, and what has come to be known as the Americas. The hundreds of millions of dead due to the slave trade and slavery itself. The millions exterminated everywhere Europeans ventured. These are people whose hands were forever removed from a relationship with nature that would result in production. Europeans achieved their national identity by way of this bloody process. This is not something that only happened a long time ago. The world's peoples are suffering the consequence of capitalism's emergence right now. Locked in colonies and the indirect rule of neo-colonialism, restricted to lives characterized by brutality, ignorance, and violence in the barrios of the Americas, in other internal colonies characterized as Indian reservations and Black ghettos, kept under the paranoid, nuclear-backed, armed to the teeth watch of military forces born of a state power that has its origin in protecting the relationship between capitalism and its imperial pedestal. Capitalism has been the absolute factor in restricting our production and development. It has concentrated productive capacity in the hands of the world's minority, European population that sits atop the pedestal of our oppressive reality. Capitalism was not the good progressive force that is the precursor to something better for humanity. Capitalism was a disaster that rescued Europe from a disease-fueled existence at the expense of Africans and the rest of the world. In the 17th century, Galileo, an Italian scientist, ran afoul of the Catholic Church with his claim that the earth circumnavigated the sun, as opposed to the prevailing view in feudal Europe supported by the church that the earth was the center of the universe. The white left has always been locked into a worldview that places the location of Europeans at the center of the universe. If this were not the case, Marx would have been forced to declare that the road to socialism is painted black. The destruction of the pedestal upon which all capitalist activity occurs, not some maturation of contradictions within European capitalist society resting upon the pedestal, is the key to overturning imperialist capitalism. In an earlier work titled The Poverty of Philosophy, Marx made this startling admission, quote, "Direct slavery is as much the pivot of bourgeois industry as machinery, credits, etc. Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry. It is slavery that gave the colonies their value. It is the colonies that created world trade. And it is world trade that is the precondition of large-scale industry. Without slavery, North America, the most progressive of countries, would be transformed into a patriarchal country. Wipe North America off the map of the world, and you will have anarchy, the complete decay of modern commerce and civilization. Cause slavery to disappear, and you will have wiped America off the map of nations," unquote. What an excellent formula for the overthrow of capitalism. The slavery of today is comprised of the colonial subject and oppressed peoples of the world. The existence of our party and the convening of our 6th Congress are part of the trajectory to cause slavery to disappear and objectively to achieve the consequence predicted by Marx. Uhuru. So I was thinking perhaps we could stop here and go ahead and entertain discussion. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, I want to appreciate you for just another brilliant study for the part 2 of the study around the theory of African internationalism. And we are going to entertain questions from our live audience. So if you have not wrote your question yet in Facebook and the YouTube chats, you can go ahead and type your question up. We do have a couple of questions that came in, but before we get to those, I want to acknowledge where people are viewing from. We have Egypt, St. Louis, Missouri, Kuwait, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Petersburg, Florida, Lawrenceville, Georgia, Berea, Kentucky, Brooklyn, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Huntsville, Alabama, Louisville, Kentucky, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Tampa, Florida, Oakland, California, Bermuda, San Diego, California, Netherlands, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Newark, New Jersey, Fort Myers, Florida, Ghana, Gainesville, Florida, and New York on with us this morning. So crew, comrades from everywhere you're watching. So we're actually going to take two questions first that came in from last week's study that we were not able to get to, Chairman, regarding, and it was on, we were studying part 1 on the theory of African internationalism. So one of the questions we did not get to came from Marian Armstrong on Facebook, asked, is this only for Africans? What about the Aboriginal men and women of America? Any solutions for us? Yeah.
This is a definition of contradiction that include our brothers and sisters and comrades of the Aboriginal people, the traditional custodians of the land and resources here in this country. Our party has always felt that way, and even though we recognize that we involved in making the African Revolution, we also recognize we are part of the revolution of the Americas. And upon being brought here in chains at gunpoint, there was a time where the only allies that we had in this country were the indigenous people. There are certain indigenous groups that are characterized as tribes, so that you can see the Africa in those groups. You can see the relationship, even the Seminoles of the that's now much based in Florida and parts of Georgia, are commonly recognized as that. In fact, much of the war that was made by Andrew Jackson, the great white man, Indian killer, slave owner, that they want to put Harriet Tubman's picture on the other side of the $20 bill along with this guy. He pursued much of what was called the Indian Wars in Florida and in parts of Florida and Georgia, et cetera, in part because many Africans had escaped from the slavery of the white man and had joined and had become leaders and not just leaders, but lived as among the indigenous people. And part of that war that was waged by Jackson was an attempt to recapture and crush the resistance of enslaved African people. So we've had a long history, and we are part of that struggle, and we see the unity between Africans and the indigenous people, or the Aboriginal people, as the comrade just mentioned, as fundamentally significant. We are a part of that revolutionary movement, and we have demonstrated that in various different ways as the African People's Socialist Party. And to the extent that we can connect with indigenous Aboriginal peoples in the struggle against imperialism, for your land, for your resources, for your dignity, for your freedom, we'll be there and have been there. There are people, I'm sure, who are participating in this meeting today who know concretely of the times where we have traveled to demonstrate that unity. We stood with the comrades, the Dene people on Big Mountain in the 1980s. We were there when they were expecting an attack by the federal government on their land that the federal government wanted to take back because they had discovered uranium or something to that effect there. And the indigenous people were prepared to fight. And that's one thing that I really also love about the indigenous or the Aboriginal people, as this comrade characterized them, is that their willingness to actually to fight. And they have had to do this almost alone. And even today, you don't hear much discussion of the indigenous people unless they're in the room themselves. And they live in, they exist in concentration camps called Indian reservations, whatever, the most deplorable kinds of conditions. And so our unity, our solidarity is absolute, And to the extent that we can deepen the unity on every front, we want to do that, and we'll do that. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. And that actually kind of dealt with the second question that came in last week, which was from Sobek, who was asking, could you speak on the importance of solidarity between African indigenous peoples? And they asked specifically in Los Angeles. I think that's because that's where they're located. But
yeah, I mean, this is a really critical issue, and for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that in short order, within the next 2 decades, they've already estimated, and I figure it would happen earlier than that, white people will be a minority in this country. One of the reasons that they're so frantic about the border in the South and about Mexicans and other indigenous people crossing that border into this country, that's often referred to as La Reconquista. One of the reasons that they're concerned about this is because this minority of white population is effectively being surrounded by the colonized and oppressed peoples, which is another reason that they work over time to try to see how many, when I say they, this is not a homogeneous ruling class. It's a ruling class that has, different tentacles and different interests being expressed through different kinds of formations like political parties and things like that. But there's a sector of them, of the ruling class, that really wants to try to incorporate as many Africans and Mexicans and other people into the system so that the dearth of white people does not mean the death of the system. That the system can prevail because they've convinced you that the way forward is to become a mixed person or to become a hyphenated person, as opposed to who the hell you really are. And you think you've been complimented oftentimes when the system says, well, we're gonna allow you to be a mixed person now. You don't have to be African. You can be part of us, or you can become, we give greater significance to your hyphenated definition. That's a means by which one sector of the bourgeoisie feels that it can guarantee the survival of the system itself, by incorporating many of the oppressed into it and to function as oppressors of the rest of the world. Uhuru. And when we say many of the oppressed, we're talking about a handful of Negroes and a handful of Mexicans and a handful of, et cetera, who actually function as a neo-colonial, you might even call it what do you call it? What is it they say, a diversified neo-colonial, sector that dominates, used to dominate the rest of us.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman. The next question, so that was all from last week that we didn't get to. So now we're moving into questions that have come in this morning. The first one being from Marcus Louison on YouTube asks, the US is declining as the world's leading imperial power. Realistically, when can we expect their reign to end? When we bring it down. Realistically, it will end. When we join with the peoples of the world who are fighting to make it end, it's not going to commit suicide. I mean, it may take a poison pill if it, if it ever becomes aware, like they say Hitler did in the bunker, but the reality is that the end of this empire, it will be determined by what's bringing it into decline right now. And that's the resistance of the people and the role of the African revolution, consciously involved in a fight for power, as opposed to taking up slogans and strategies that attempt to actually rescue the system by becoming one with it, by empty slogans of Black Lives Matter, whining slogans like that, as opposed to arming the people with revolutionary theory that's designed to bring it down. Because our survival and the survival of people on the earth depends on our bringing it down. Because, and people now, many have cast their future, put their futures in the hand, willingly going out and putting their future in the hands of Joseph Biden,
and Kamala Harris. I mean, it's extraordinary. And of course, you can see the masses of people who don't have information, don't have access to the kinds of analysis that the so-called leaders should have. And if they don't have, they should get out of the damn way. You can see why masses of people might blindly do that. But, you know, so, you know, our future is going to, and the defeat of this whole system is going to require a conscious, organized effort of the working peoples of the world and the African working class in this country, organized under the leadership of this Advanced Detachment, the African People's Socialist Party, and around the world connected to the African Socialist International. Uhuru.
Uhuru. This next question comes from Comrade Matsamela Odem. He asked this question on Facebook, says, Uhuru, Marxists, even the Black ones like Padmore, refer to Africans as backwards. Can you explain this in relation to their incorrect assessment of the development of capitalism?
That's a really important question. And that's part of why it was important for us in this discussion, in this chapter, to discredit this whole notion that imperialism came from the development of capitalism. Because if you understand it correctly, you will see that the influence and development of the whole white world came as a consequence of theft of resources, science, human and material resources from Africa, from other peoples that have now themselves been colonized. So, you know, you have this capture of all of our power, all of our resources and claim. It's like the discovery of America. Well, now they discovered civilization, discovered humanity, discovered science, discovered all this stolen knowledge and resources from oppressed people. So it was imperialism. It was the empire, the various expressions of empire that left Europe and went to Africa and went to Asia and other places to capture resources and human and material resources that transformed Europe. Europe became transformed. But it didn't just transform Europe. It's like the mythological vampire that once it kisses or bites you, it transforms you too. So that what has happened is that this transformation of Europe left structures in place. It created structures, left them in place, and they've been in there in various modified forms since the advent of slavery and colonialism, sucking blood, sucking resources, and what have you. And many of the intellectuals, African intellectuals, have also come to conclude that that European society is the highest possible expression of human society, and that if a certain aspect of means by which people survived and expressed their existence in Africa or some other place was not as in Europe, is because we're at a lower level and we have to achieve what Europe has achieved in order to become something. You know, when we just this discussion just now, when we're talking about how we spoke to how the comrade who wrote the book from Harvard about how Africans was first capital. We first capital. And Lenin's talking about the export of capital. Developing at some time that represented the emergence of imperialism. Africans were first capital. The export of capital has been going on for a long time, since its very beginning. And the other thing is, in my view, we're looking at Marxist theory being, much of it being ripped asunder by this whole concept of what do you call it, the Africans who, and people who they say now are the workers, what do they call them, that the ones who are on the front lines fighting against the pandemic, essential workers. I mean, we've always been the essential workers. The whole foundation of the system has been us, the Africans, who've been disregarded as even factors in the development of human society, production and what have. We've always been the essential workers. So anyway, Comrade Matsamela, I just think that what we've done and tried to explain in this particular chapter is even how philosophers emerge. task that philosophers have. It's not like philosophers drop out of the sky, in that they just engage in empty, non-significant ideas that just fall out of the sky and whatever. They are responding to needs in society one way or another. That's what African Internationalism does. That's what we do. And that's what makes us such a critical force at this particular time in history. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. I'm going to pause just for a second just to acknowledge some more places where people are viewing from. Ellenwood, Georgia checked in, Trinity, North Carolina, Jacksonville, Florida, and occupied Azania. So, Uhuru, comrades, thank you for tuning in. And now our next question comes from Chimaranga Stilimbao, who is the National Director of Organization for the African People's Socialist Party, USA. And he asks, Uhuru, Chairman, in your analysis of the requirements for revolution, where would the consolidation of African nationality be in terms of priorities, or must all the conditions for revolution be given the same priority?
Well, I think that this is a dialectical process. I think this is a part of the revolutionary project. I think this is a part of what we see our task as being, as African internationalists working for that kind of consolidation. That's why we want to put our philosophical imprint on the struggles of Africans and other oppressed peoples around the world too, because it's not just good enough for Africans to recognize who the hell we are as a people, but others must recognize this too in order to have the best relationship with us, in order to be able to effectively join and unite with us in the struggle against imperialism. So I see this as a dialectical process, and that the closer, the more effective we are in this process, then the less effective of colonial capitalism as a social system is. I mean, Garvey went out in the world and built a revolutionary movement that helped African people worldwide to understand our connectedness, and that's what we're doing. That's what even this discussion right here is all about. It contributes to that understanding. That's what the meeting we just had at Party Forces on yesterday was all about, where Africans from throughout the world are now assuming this responsibility to go out into the world as an African internationalist, is to work for consolidation of the African nation. It is a critical aspect of it. That's what we're doing all the time. So it's a dialectical approach. And what's happening too is the crisis of the imperialism. It's not just that we're working around this question in a vacuum. The crisis of imperialism continues to raise issues for the colonizer in terms of who the hell she is or who the hell he is. Because the colonizer, our national oppressor, has defined himself in relationship to us, defined us. The colonizer created the colonized, and created the colonizer as well. The colonizer has defined us as Black and then himself as white. Colonized has defined us as uncivilized and himself as civilized. And so now we're at a place in the world where the definition that the colonizer has imposed on Africans and other peoples around the world is under assault. That's part of what we talk about when we talk about how the superstructure can be measured, can be understood. The ideas that we see happening in society can also be understood in relationship to the material basis, the economic base of that society. And that economic base is under assault. In the process of assaulting the base, as we say that humans get involved and struggle to change the world, in the process of changing the world, we change ourselves. And also the white world is being changed as a consequence of this too, having this dreadful experience of having to say, who the hell are we? This is what white people are having to say, because we damn sure ain't who you said we are, and you base who you are on who you said we are. So that question is one that abounds too. So that the national question, as we characterize, the dialectical question, is something that is always in motion to the extent the oppressed African people are constantly engaged in conquering our own power. Uhuru. I hope that wasn't too convoluted and esoteric in some ways, but it's a dialectical issue, a dialectical question, and African internationalism is a philosophy of, it's a philosophy of practice, and the practice is what helps to bring into bold relief the philosophy, and it explains it, it announces it, it promotes it, and what have you. And the process of becoming free is the process of building the African nation, consolidating the African nation. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. Next question comes from Malek Zaid, who wrote this question on YouTube. He's asked, the most successful expression of colonialism, I believe, is when Africans oppress other Africans on its behalf. How can the strategy of the oppressor be dealt with?
You're talking about neo-colonialism. It's really interesting. You should raise that, because that's one of the fundamental contradictions that we have to deal with today. It confuses a lot of people, a lot of African peoples in particular, and a lot of people who fought for freedom in the 1960s and even later, who thought that something had been accomplished because some African people were now heads of state, were now the ones who presided over these institutions of governance. Have been worse in almost every instance, worse than what we had before. And there was a man whose name was Frederick Lugard. You may have heard me mention him before. Lugard was this white guy, he was called Lord Lugard, from England, who was tasked to organize these territories that's now known as Nigeria. And he was more than that. He was an aide in various other places for the British. These colonial forces, they have shaped consciously, like shaped and defined the world. But it was he who came up with the concept, or developed it, probably didn't originate with him, but really developed this whole concept of indirect rule. And I suspect the concept of indirect rule was something that got consolidated after a period of time, because, as you know, historically, you know, they would use an African on the plantation to be the one to, you know, to harass and control other Africans. The infamous so-called Indian scout, you know, the one. So they've always used those of us they could, but it got consolidated into a real program under British colonialism by Frederick Lugard, and so this indirect rule, which would even allow Africans to have your own flag and have your own elections and things like that, to have someone who formally represents us on the one hand, but the colonizer, the white man, even after all of the glorious ceremonies and the colonizer on the ship at 12:01, right after midnight, with this ceremony going off across the horizon in the sea. On the other hand, they still own and control all of our resources, which means they control us. That means they control the ones that are still in power, which means they control the definition of the system, our relationships. I mean, up until recently, I don't know if it still happens, but even in independent South Africa and other places where British had control, the university tests and things like that were graded by Cambridge in England. So, you know, this indirect rule has been there. And so what has to happen is revolution is going to have to include getting rid of these neo-colonial puppets and the neo-colonial puppet states and regimes themselves, these distorted entities that's called states in Africa. They have to be gotten rid of themselves. Africa, we're going to find ourselves, the African Revolution is going to have to overturn all of that. And because these are the forces who not only simply represent white power and keep stealing our resources and control us, that their armies are European armies, are extensions of the European states that kill and oppress us to keep us, to keep the flow of our resources going to Europe, going to white power. Now you got AFRICOM, where you got, now they're backed up by more directly by US military forces all in every so-called state in Africa to protect this neo-colonial setup. So the revolution of Black people is going to have to include an attack on neo-colonialism, on opportunism, on the class forces that support white power. They're gonna have to be overthrown as a part of the process of our winning our freedom. That's gonna have to happen. There's no other way to it. Neo-colonialism has to go. Uhuru.
True. The next question comes from Dwight Davidson on Facebook, asks, analyze the organization Black Lives Matter, and is it a progressive force or regressive force funded by the capitalist class? How will true revolutionaries deal with it?
Well, let me just say that majority of the people who run out and say Black Lives Matter are responding to a brand. And this brand was created, certainly if not created, pushed by the rulers in this country. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I saw its first meaningful expression in Ferguson, St. Louis, after the murder of Mike Brown, where the people on Canfield Drive, that working class community where Mike Brown was killed, after seeing that body on the ground there for 4.5 hours and 90-degree plus, 100-degree plus asphalt weather, they were not chanting Black Lives Matter. They were saying kill the police, which was a logical response. And not only to Brown's murder, but Brown's murder came as a part of the ongoing harassment and police terror and murder of Black people, not just in Ferguson, St. Louis, but around the country. And so in this place, it was concentrated in the African working class community, their response was kill the police. And then in St. Louis, every reactionary that you could imagine, Black relatives of Martin Luther King, TV personalities, all kinds of forces came into to Ferguson, St. Louis, and they were funded, and a lot of money came in. And Soros was not the only one, but he was one of them. And Soros still spending a lot of money around this country and around the world, but certainly in this country to help define how we are going to struggle as a people. So you see the emergence of Black Lives Matter. You see it on CNN. You see it in the House of Representatives of the United States government. You see Barack Hussein Obama, who, if he's alive when we come to power, is going to be put on trial, along with a lot of the others of them. All of them saying Black Lives Matter, which means nothing. So, and then millions, and I've heard maybe scores and hundreds of millions of them plus to this Black Lives Matter thing. But who is Black Lives Matter? You know, they'll bring out 3 or 4 persons of the founders, and she's a lesbian, so you know she's all right because she's a lesbian, all right? That's you. She got her bona fides. She is a lesbian, right? And there's another lesbian, you know, and these are the people who they put in front of this whole question. But it's a brand, so people run out. No matter when the police gets killed, someplace what they know is Black Lives Matter. So they get their Black Lives Matter T-shirt, their Black Lives Matter signs, and they go out. All around the country, people are saying Black Lives Matter, but what is it connected to? It's a brand, it's a diversion. And so this is a struggle that we are consistently involved in, and trying to take science into this and not condemning the people who come out with those slogans, because it's profound. People want to find a way to respond, but they can't find us that easily because CNN is not going to promote us. Barack Obama is not going to promote us. Al Charlatan is not going to promote us. They promote those things that they want you to see because it doesn't take you anywhere. Our job, our responsibility is to, among the masses, not even get caught up so much on the streets with the people. Black Lives Matter doesn't mean anything. I've spoken with 4,000 or 5,000 people in Lakeland, Florida, and challenged the line Black Lives Matter, but I didn't just say, don't say Black Lives Matter. I have tried to explain and raise the questions that's important to people to understand that colonialism, that we have to have power, and just saying Black Lives Matter doesn't take you to power. You have to say death to colonialism. You have to say Black community control of the police. You have to give concrete examples of where the people should be going that explains where we are right now and that promises victory for the people. And so that's how we intervene in this struggle. But it's a brand. That's all it is. It's a brand. And I don't want to say that's all it is, because as we know, brands are powerful, and the bourgeoisie is promoting this brand and on every front. Even Trump condemns this brand, just like Trump condemns Barack Hussein Obama. So people say, damn, Obama must be all right. Trump talking bad about Obama. But hell, they talk bad about Clinton. Clinton wasn't all right, although I know you said he was the first Black president. Clinton wasn't all right, and his damn saxophone playing wasn't that good either. But the point is that just because one sector of the bourgeoisie is opposed to another sector doesn't mean that they're for us. We have to be for us, and we have to define what it is that we need to achieve our freedom. And saying Black Lives Matter will not achieve our freedom, that's not just here, it's in Congo. People are going out saying Black Lives Matter are being murdered, in the streets, demonstration, Black Lives Matter. And it's an insidious thing. It was a creation of certainly if it wasn't created, it damn sure has been promoted and put forth by the bourgeoisie because it doesn't say anything. It doesn't call for anything. It may satisfy you by saying that you are important. The way you know you're important is by taking power over our lives. You know that our children will have a future because that future is in our hands and not CNN or not some other, the Democratic Party or some other entity like that. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairman, for that analysis. This next question comes from Nasir Alamin. He asks, Uhuru, does African internationalism agree with the statement by Cyril Briggs that socialism and communism were in practical application in Africa for centuries before they were even advanced as theories in the European world?
Well, I'm glad Cyril Briggs got something right, because most of the time he was, with his African Black Brotherhood, he was an agent of the Communist Party that fought viciously against Marcus Garvey after he did not succeed in infiltrating it and taking it over for the Communist Party. And he was a leader of the whole, one of the leaders and spokespersons of the Black Belt South philosophy that challenged Garvey. But yeah, I mean, you can say that because the Marxists looked for what communism might look like. They couldn't find that experience in Europe, as quiet as it's kept. In fact, the most significant work done on that was by Frederick Engels, who took the works of was an anthropologist from this country, from the US, Harry Morgan, who did a study of the Iroquois indigenous people here, and about how the people lived, and then I think of some other peoples. And the thing is that there's an assumption in Europe that European civilization was the highest. Therefore, if this was something that was experienced by the Iroquois, then it was pre-civilization, more or less. It was pre-civilization. So they use this as an example of what they call primitive communism or communalism was. And it was something that only got achieved, the real deal only got achieved through their theory after it got to Europe, and a certain level of development happened, and then you have the real McCoy of communism. So yeah, I say that the social relations that they're talking about, the relations of production that they're talking about existed in Africa a long time ago. This is why you will find in much of Africa, there was no oppression, exploitation of women. And that's why the whole concept of village to raise a child, it was the community of people owned the land. There was no private ownership of the land. And much of Africa, you can even find remnants of that even today, that an individual doesn't own the land. So yeah, and there was no example that they could use from Europe, certainly not as a general principle. And so Briggs was right on that, yeah. He got something right, Uhuru.
All right, so Chairman, we don't currently have any other questions. I'm still looking I'm sure people are probably typing them into the chat as I speak, but I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say or expound on while I try to pull up another question.
I want to say that Cyril Briggs was an interesting figure. He headed an organization called the African Blood Brotherhood. And he looked white. So Garvey was able to get him at one stage to to buy ships to buy a ship because he looked like a white man. And so, just like today, it was easier for white people to engage in commerce than it was for African people to engage in white-dominated commerce. And so that happened. And but the Communist Party USA supported and funded that entity. In fact, many people, there's a man named Harry Haywood who achieved great significance in the Marxist politic as the Black representative who was the one whose name they put on the Black Belt South theory, although he was opposed to it. He was in Moscow as a white guy, as a Russian who actually did it. And so, but this guy's name was associated with it. So when he joined the Communist Party, and he walked all around the Garvey movement, there were only 50 Africans in the Communist Party. And he was put into Briggs African Blood Brotherhood. That's what it was. It was a holding station. It was a means by which Africans who came into the Communist Party would carry out the line of the Communist Party, and they were put into the African Blood Brotherhood. So Briggs was there. And Briggs was militant and bold, and he was trying to destroy the Garvey movement. In fact, his newspaper even wrote an article claiming at one time that Garvey had raped I think it was an 8-year-old or 13-year-old white girl. It was just an absolute, totally notoriously inflammatory, slanderous piece. So yeah, we know about Briggs, and so he got that right. I think the whole, and I don't know the whole context of how he would put it, but he got that right.
For real. So we did get another question in from Comrade Matsamela. Asked, Paul Bogle said, cleave to the black. Can you explain how complexion at times, especially in the Caribbean, functioned as a form of class consciousness, or at least a way to explain class?
Well, it wasn't just in the Caribbean. I've read in many instances, that's what Du Bois would criticize Garvey and saying that Garvey's assumptions about light-skinned Africans and things like that was based on his experiences in the Caribbean. But my experiences in the United States, in St. Petersburg, Florida, and something that we saw all along was there was this kind of prejudice that was exhibited even from the bourgeoisie about his own children, the light-complexioned African people. And there was an assumption that the closer one was to the appearance of whiteness, the more valid one was. And there was the notion of good hair and bad hair associated with the premise that, that African hair was bad hair because it was not white light. And so that's something we've lived with for a long time. And there is, I forgot how it's put, something in the United States where, dark-skinned children were African booty scratchers. And I mean, this was a part of the whole history. I mean, to be Black, people would actually get in fights in the United States to be characterized as Black. So the reality is that there has been this class-related deference that's based on complexion. Not just here, South Africa, the coloreds and what have you, they're poor as hell, poor as dirt, teeth rotten and stuff like that because of their diet and the Cape area, et cetera, but they were coloreds and elevated above the rest of African people. And so it did represent a kind of class distinction that was thrust into our midst, just like virtually every expression of class distinction, one way or another, was thrust into our midst. So that was a real thing that we had to contend with. And it was not just, in some extent, we still contend with it. I mean, look at poor Michael Jackson. I mean, this guy was one of the most talented human beings you want to find on the planet Earth. Came to be one of the wealthiest people on the planet Earth. etc., and still could not escape the fact that his value in this society, in European in the world, as defined by complexion. So the whiter you are, and that's not just true in the African world either. I mean, there are people who in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, and go to the barbers to have their eyes rounded so they look more like white people. You find the names of Spanish-speaking people, Blanca, and what have you, based on whiteness. I mean, this whole thing about being white, that's the colonizer has defined that, and we would, and you know, the whole, how was it characterized in the United States about some kind of brown paper bag complexion, if you were darker than a brown paper bag and what have you, it was bad. You were bad. You were not good catch for society, for Black upper class society. So that class, that racial complexion thing has been a factor that's been thrust into our lives for a very long time, and it's been very real too. And white people are much more comfortable with people who look more like them than they are with the rest of us. You find that when O.J. Simpson was the issue of O.J. Simpson, who was supposed to kill them white people in California. One of the leading magazines, national news magazines, actually photoshopped his picture when they put it on the front cover to make it dark, to make it blacker than he actually was in complexion. So that's a real thing in the real world that we are confronted with. And the thing is that you know, we can't compound that ourselves. I just remember how in the 60s when Black became beautiful, how when Black became beautiful, then light skin became a problem for many of the Africans in our own communities. And then you hear the whine that, you know, I'm rejected by both people, rejected by the Black people, rejected by the white people. Oh, please, you know. Anyway, you don't have to be rejected by anybody. Just pick a side.
That's right, Chairman. True. This question, Chimaranga posed another one, asked, in your opinion, is the historical epoch of imperialism overlapping with the development of capitalism?
Say it again. Is the historical? What?
Is the historical epoch of imperialism overlapping with the development of capitalism?
I don't understand the question.
Okay. All right. Well, Chimaranga, if you could clarify your question, please.
Sound like Marx, man. Complex. one of those French intellectuals. You got me. Come around. I don't know what the hell you just said. No, the educated French intellectual, they learn to even speak a different language than the rest of us. So they go through these, you know, really, you know, complicated, you know. Yeah, but I'm sure that it's me. I just didn't understand what was meant by that.
Sure, it wasn't just you, Chairman. If I understood, I'd break it down. So I was hoping you did. Okay, well, this next question comes from the last African on YouTube. Asked, Chairman, how do we achieve liberation in America without violence? Impossibly.
You do that, I can't tell you a way that's going to be possible. We're going to have to fight our way out of this one. And because violence is there in every aspect of our lives. And when you say without violence, of course, I mean, I know that you're suggesting without responding to the violence of colonialism in kind. And because violence is every aspect of our lives. And this is something that, comrades, that we really, really, really have to understand and be able to explain. Because violence is not just when somebody picks up a gun or throws a rock or something to that effect. Violence in our lives is just a major ongoing assault on everything that we're confronted with. I mean, violence, it crushes, there's an ongoing process of crushing the spirit, the very soul of Black people all the time. It's you know, humiliation. I mean, even the death of George Floyd that we looked at. I mean, there are 1,000 ways you can kill somebody, you know, but this is a part, this killing in this fashion, which was torturous, etc., but it was also humiliating. It was demeaning. It was just a statement about the value of human life itself. And look at how, what's the name of the brother who they killed in Long Island, who they choked to death, but even as they were doing that, they're grinding his head into the pavement and what have you. I mean, violent, and leaving Mike Brown dead in 100-degree plus weather on asphalt for 4.5 hours. It's killing, it's that form of violence, it's humiliation. The whole African people experienced that humiliation. Look at how they dealt with Patrice Lumumba. Look at how they kill African people around the world. I mean, it's just, violence is just an aspect, the education in the schools. And we fight to get into the schools, and then you get there and they create more mayhem on the consciousness and the minds of Black people in a single day than drugs and things like they put in our community does do in years. So it's an ongoing process of violating African people, and violating our spirit, violating our physical bodies and things like that. And so that's an ongoing thing. So when you talk about violence, colonialism is violence. Every aspect of colonialism is violence. Every theft of every African name is violence. To be named after the one who brought you into slavery, to name you after him is a statement of power. Look at, I mean, the humiliation. This is an ongoing kind of process that they do to us on a regular basis. And our children, you know, we live in communities where, and this is all around the world, where we cannot say with any kind of certainty that our children will even have a future or will even live. This is violence all the time. And even if it's not done by guns, it's done by starvation. It's done by creating quarantine, economic quarantine of our community, stealing all of our resources, and that's violence. So no, we're not getting out of this without violence. This is violence that's imposed on us every aspect of our lives, stealing your songs, your culture, and then turning it against you. I mean, they would steal like everything, like from, you don't know who I'm talking about, like a Charles Brown, who was a mainstay in blues in this country for quite a while. And then when Charles Brown is aging, a white woman named Bonnie Raitt, who's supposed to be a blues singer, is the one who adopts and takes care of him. Steal all of our culture, steal all of our resources, and then we become dependent on the ones who've stolen every damn thing from us. That's violence. That's every aspect of that is violence. And taking our children, you know, they're gonna go to Africa, they're gonna go to Haiti, they're gonna, help the poor Negroes, we're gonna take the children, we're starving them, starving their children, but we're gonna be nice and then take the children from the families that we're starving. They impose disease in our communities everywhere around the world, and then they're gonna be helpful and come to bring us some kind of remedy. You know, they destroy the farms and the agricultural development all over the continent of Africa, and then they send some people in trucks with little blue helmets on, throwing bleached flour across to the people who, because we can't grow our own food because of what they've done. That's violence. So nobody had a gun when they did it, that's violence. And so to say that somebody picked up a gun or threw a brick or something like that, these are people who, you playing catch up. You can't even commit enough mayhem of violence against white power, against the colonizer, against the colonial state. There's no, you can live long enough to compare to what they have done and continue to do us as a normal function every day of our lives. So violence is there with us, and it's going to take violence to get it off of us. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Chairman. I think we have time for one more question, and I really want to take this one because it came from our very own DJ Eddie, who is the best blind DJ.
Best blind DJ
world. Right on our very own Black Power 96.3 FM. He called to get this question in. He asked, in light of Labor Day weekend, should Africans be celebrating Labor Day, or is this something, you know, that was created by white people? So. Well,
yeah, it was created by white people, but if any claim to Labor Day and to celebrate workers, which is what we're talking about, I'm talking about labor, and then there's no labor that has been more beneficial, more consequential than the labor of Black people and Africans. And we just have to define it the way it needs to be defined. because we, like as I said earlier, we were the essential workers that built this entire thing. And take the definition, and what has happened is that increasingly you will notice that nobody wants to be defined as workers in the working class, because what they've done to African people has besmirched the whole concept of labor and work. So it's now associated with Black slavery, whether it's articulated that way or not, and sometimes it's almost articulated that way. So that like every politician's run for office running to help the middle class. The middle class. There, where is the working class? And the fact is, so yeah, we take the whole concept of Labor Day and apply it to the day of the colonized African whose labor built this entire social system, and we can have programs and things that speak to that for Labor Day and enjoy ourselves. So let's celebrate Labor Day as the day we can call it Labor Liberation Day. We can call it the day of the actual liberation of African labor that created this whole thing. And the liberation of African labor requires us to take down this system that steals our labor and uses it against us every day of our lives. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you.
Uhuru.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, DJ Eddie. And so we're nearing the end. We have about 4 minutes left until we go into announcements, Chairman. So did you want to close us out with any remarks?
I just want to say that every week now, I've had an opportunity for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks perhaps now, to speak to this question of the electoral process that's happening inside the United States and how it's creating such a dilemma for so many people. People who don't find anything on the in the platform of either of the Democratic or the Republican parties for presidency that speak to our interests, but in many and perhaps most instances are terrified by another Trump regime. And therefore, I'm prepared in many instances to have a discussion about the fact that there's no fundamental difference in a Trump regime and a Biden regime. And people say, well, Trump represents fascism. And I don't even want to have to go through that discussion anymore about fascism, because colonialism is colonialism, whether there's a fascist regime or a democratic regime. The French fought against fascism in the Second Imperialist War on the one hand, and so they were the great Democrat anti-fascists, but they at the same time kept us colonized in Africa and Algeria and Vietnam and other places. So, and don't tell the people of Vietnam and Algeria and other places in Africa where French was colonizing us that somehow defeating German fascism was a wonderful thing for us. The fact is that colonialism is colonialism, which is not to say that an imperialism in a state of obvious decline is not dangerous. And it is dangerous. It's dangerous not necessarily because of the state as we understand it, but because of the extension of the state into the general white population. That is to say, popularizing the state, the people state, white people who are functioning as arms of the state. We see all over this country these actual physical battles that's happening in some of these demonstrations where the so-called Trump supporters and so-called right-wingers and white people are coming out with guns and other things and attacking people, and their consciousness is being inflamed as the system is in a state of deterioration precisely because it all rests upon the ability to continue to exploit us. So it's an existential crisis. And so that's a problem. And people need to be able to defend ourselves. And defending ourselves, I believe right now, I want to say it should be clear, that if you don't have a weapon, get several. And organize in our communities so that we can defend ourselves and protect ourselves. That's one aspect of it. But the other thing I want to say is just in terms of this electoral process, that the Black is Back Coalition, that was the party, our party helped to create and find, and we have supported forever, is having a mobilization in Washington, D.C. This demonstration is going to be a rally and at Malcolm X Park, and then a march on the White House. This process begins on the 6th of November, where there'll be a pre-rally rally, and then on the 7th there'll be an actual rally at Malcolm X Park, and then a march on the White House, and then after that another rally across the street, and then a conference on the following day. And this is titled Black Power Matters, Down with Colonialism, and Black Community Control of the Police. And that's why it's calling on everybody to participate in this. And because you don't have to simply vote for Biden. You don't have to simply fear Trump. We have to put our agenda, out to ourselves. We have to put our agenda out to the world. We have to say, this is what we want. This is what we're fighting for. It's not on the ballot. So we have to vote with our feet. We have to have our own convention. The Democratic and Republican Party conventions did not represent us. And so we're coming out. We have a national Black political agenda for self-determination, was created over a period of months throughout, with state conventions throughout this country, in 10 or 11 different states, and in DC, and then a national convention in DC for National Black Political Agenda for Self-Determination. It's a good platform, and we say adopt that platform by coming out for this mobilization. Make your vote, whatever you do on November 3rd, and I'm not telling you what to do. Whatever you do on November 3rd, make sure on November 6th, 7th, and 8th, you cast your vote with your body, with your voice, with your slogans, with your banners, with your campaign, with your support for our own agenda, so that that agenda is something that we'll be fighting for the next 4 years, or for as long as it takes to bring this whole system down. So you don't have to say, okay, I'm going to hold my nose and do this vote, and then go ahead and surrender for the rest of for the next 4 years. We say that this gives you something to take to every mobilization, every demonstration that you're going to be doing for the entirety, because that's not on the platform of either of the candidates. So that's what I wanted to say. So I'd like to see you in November at the Black is Back Coalition, Black Power Matters, Down with Colonialism, Black Community Control of the Police, rally, march, and conference. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairman. And I will be letting people know in just a short moment, again, the registration information for that mobilization, the March on the White House, hosted by the Black is Back Coalition. But I just really want to appreciate this political education and how helpful it has been in deepening our understanding on the theory of African internationalism. And want to say that because of time, if your question was not answered, that one of our moderators will correspond with you to make sure that the chairman sees your question, and will be asked at the start of the Q&A on the next episode. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, where we're winning the war of ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via our Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out our contact form. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest books, Vanguard, The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, as well as An Uneasy Equilibrium, at burningspearmarketplace.com. That was the text that we were reading from earlier. Starting Sunday, September 13th, from 7 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern, Buy Black Power presents Africonomy Live on Instagram Live at Buy Black Power, where we will be featuring Buy Black Power members, their businesses, and what it means to buy Black Power. Our first guest is Siali Moyenda of All Power Promotions and Creations. The International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement invites you to their annual convention, Build the African Nation. 100 years later, it's still red, black, and green. Taking place September 11th through the 13th, and PDUM is calling on you to fight for Black Power and register for free at INPDUM and PDUM2020.eventbrite.com. That's this coming weekend. On November 6th through the 8th, as mentioned by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations hosts its annual Black People's March on the White House. Black Power Matters, Down with Colonialism, Black Community Control of the Police. Plan to attend and register today at blackisbackcoalition.org. And we are calling on people to follow the All African People's Development Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus known as COVID-19. APDEP has recently launched an international telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. And every week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela goes live at 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays with an address to the African nation dealing with topical events and situations in the world where he provides an African internationalist analysis. So that's another opportunity to have political education with our chairman. So again, 3 p.m. on Wednesdays, broadcast from Chairman Omali Yeshitela's Facebook page and the Burning Spear TV YouTube. Lastly, to keep up with our movement events, you can visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.